Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SavvyCast. This is Jamie, and I'm so grateful to all of you who are joining today, whether you're watching on YouTube or listening to the podcast. Could not be more thrilled today on the topic we're going to be discussing or the guest that will be joining me, Steve Hines. Steve Hines and his beautiful wife, Leigh Ann, are some of our oldest and dearest friends. Steve is here to share all about his new book, Salt, Light, and Kids. It is a must read for anyone who wants to know biblically based, practical, and sound advice on parenting. Guys, much, much needed today. I could literally recommend this book without ever having read it, which I have because I know the one who wrote it and his wife, and I saw them parent. And can I just tell you, they are some to follow. They're very humble, but they have so much to offer. And Steve is about to join me. I just want to tell you a little bit about him. Steve Hines is a former C.P.A. He's a lifelong entrepreneur. He coached lacrosse for junior high and high school young men, and he's an ardent musician. Steve and Leigh Ann live in Nashville, Tennessee. They have been married for 35 years. They're high school sweethearts. And they have 2 granddaughters. And Steve is going to share all about this book, which, guys, I could not put it down. It's a must buy, and give it away to everyone you know who needs advice and wisdom on parenting. So without further ado, I would like to welcome to the SavvyCast my dear friend, Steve Hines. Steve Hines, welcome to the SavvyCast. I'm so thrilled that you're here today.
I am thrilled too. Thank you for having me.
Okay, well, Steve, I did your intro before you jumped on. I told everyone how dear you and Leigh Ann are to our family. And I also told them that I did not have to read this book, although you sent me a copy and read it cover to cover. I would like to just tell everyone who's listening or watching, please buy this book and please read this book. If you are going to be a parent, if you are a parent, this is rock solid, biblically based, practical advice. It's really this in the Bible, and you do great as a parent.
Thank you so much.
And our dear friend and your former pastor, our current pastor, Chris Hodges, gave a very glowing review of this. And we all know how a wonderful Pastor Chris is, and he wrote he wrote the foreword.
Yeah,
that's wonderful, Steve, because Pastor Chris wouldn't do that if he didn't believe in it. So
yeah, I was very honored. He was happy to do that.
Yeah. Okay, so we have to start with the icebreaker question that everyone has to answer, and it is, what would you choose as your last meal?
Last meal on earth would probably be a cheeseburger. Either that or some really good Chinese food, if I can have 2 choices.
Okay. Well, would Leigh Ann make the cheeseburger, or do you have a favorite cheeseburger place?
Nashville, where I live, has a lot of good cheeseburgers, so I would have a few I could pick from. But actually, because she cooks so healthy, partly because she watches your stuff, I would probably vote for hers.
I want to tell you something. 2 people on earth that I would say, if I wanted them to cook my last meal, your wife would be one.
Yeah.
And Dwayne Donner, Zane's business partner, would be the other. And if I had those 2 in my world, I'd never cook again.
Yeah, you'd be eating a lot of Cajun with Dwayne, but that'd be all right.
Yeah. And I do want everyone to know, and then we're going to dive into this book. I just can't wait. Leigh Ann Hines, his beautiful wife, who is just one of the best people on the planet, is one of the reasons Family Savvy exists. In 2011, Leigh Ann and I were leading a young mamas small group with Church of the Highlands. Steve, do you know what the title of that group was? Leigh Ann she had to remind me. I forgot, and we get a chuckle out of it. I don't know how it would fly today, but it was Housewife 101.
That would sound demeaning or
I don't
something
know
today.
today, but
Yeah.
but anyway, Zane said, "Hey, document things y'all share," and then it went from there. Family Savvy was born. It kept on going, but I'll never not credit your wife for being part of how it all started. But Steve,
That's awesome.
let's dive into this book. Kudos, 10 out of 10. I recommend. And
Thank you.
what I would like for you to do, well, let's just start. Okay, the title, Salt, Light, and Kids, Parenting Well in Today's Culture. Where did you get the title?
I went through about literally 25 or 30 titles, but just kind of kept waiting on the prompting of what's the right thing. And as I wrote, I kept coming back to the concept of salt of the earth, kind of the worldly saying, if somebody's salt of the earth, they're hardworking and dependable and on time and all of that. And then that kind of morphed into what Jesus talks about in Matthew 5, you're the salt of the earth and the light of the world, which, he calls us to be. And I got to thinking those kind of go together. If you think of some of the things that salt of the earth means, that's kind of part of what Jesus talks about with a bent of, being a witness for him and for God the Father. So I literally went through 25 or 30 titles. The original title was Leaving It All on the Field. And my editor is a woman. And when she asked me, what does that mean? I said, okay, that's not going to be the title. But the point of that initial title was successful parenting is not defined by necessarily good and bad decisions. To me, it's defined by how much effort you give. And I find a lot of parents it's something they do or kind of mixes in with all their other responsibilities. And so it was initially leaving it all on the field. But then one morning I woke up and said, Salt, Light, and Kids. That's it. And then the subtitle, Parenting Well in Today's Culture, a couple of things with that. Parenting is easy. Becoming a parent for most people is easy.
Yeah.
But parenting well is difficult.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to put an emphasis on doing it well. And then in today's culture, and in your opening, you mentioned about us being parents. It's been interesting as I become a grandparent, which is a whole new level. I have really more concern for my granddaughters than I did for my own kids. And so as I've seen the culture and the things that have changed, it's really worrisome, not to the point of fearfulness, but it definitely calls parents and grandparents to a higher level of awareness of what's going on.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Steve, one thing I love about this title is the privilege of having God give us children to raise. They're his kids. We're giving them back to him and to the world. And do we want to give back to the world what we raise or what we steward? Do we want to give selfish, entitled kids who are just going to blend right in the culture? Or do we want to give to the world servants, servant leaders, and those who are going to shine in the midst of what is becoming increasingly dark in today's society? So this, I mean, I just can't say enough about this. And it hearkened me back to many of the times that I was on the phone with your wife, and she parented before me. So y'all were steps ahead. And there were so many times I said, Leigh Ann, what do I do about this? And she was a beacon, offered so much practical wisdom based on how y'all were parenting ahead of us. And I'm just grateful that you took the time to put all of this in writing for anyone who wants to avail themselves of it, because it is fabulous. And Steve, I do want to let everyone know, I love this about this book also. It's the perfect book for a small group, because at the end, you've got the to consider, the questions, and I can't remember, are they're not like no more than 5 at the end?
Yeah, 5 questions per chapter.
They're all 5 on each.
Yeah.
And they dig deeper into what's in the chapter. And honestly, I think, because we've led the same small group we've led a small group at Highlands of young marrieds. We're in our 7th year. And
Wow.
I think that, and actually PC's, two of his sons and wives were in it. Now that we've just got one left. Love our couples. I'm going to suggest that we do this one at our next, I guess it will be the fall, because this is what these kids they need, because they've all got littles and they're getting to the point where the things they're going to have to grapple with, you address so eloquently in this book. Okay, so Steve, before I've jotted down some things I want to ask you, but just alluding to today's culture, what are some of the things that you see that were, I guess, disturbing enough to you that you said, listen, I've got to write a book?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's really, I want to tell you real quickly the kind of how this book came to be. I had not planned at all to write a book, and you haven't met, but I have a 1-year-old granddaughter named Sage, and who's her and her older sister Brooklyn are, besides Leigh Ann, my best friend. So it's so awesome. But I was sitting in the car with Sage one day in the fall while she took a nap, because you want babies to sleep as much as they can. So I was like, I'll sit in the car with her. And so I'm sitting there in the silence, and kind of my professional history, entrepreneur and all that kind of stuff. And I'd gotten to the point over the last year where the Lord was stirring in me, maybe time to do something else. You're getting old, and, something, I didn't know if it was ministry or something in music or whatever. And probably the loudest I've heard the Lord ever speak to me. And, I'm not saying it was audible, but it was a 2x4 upside the side of my head. And sitting there in that car with her, he said, write a book on parenting. And it was stunning, because I'd never thought about it, never even crossed my mind. I was like, what in the world? And I sat there and knew that was what I was supposed to do. So I went home and started writing. In a week, I had my first draft. It was crazy. But a lot of, I think, what stirred that in my heart is the culture of today. And you and I are fortunate because, well, maybe not fortunate because we're older, but we do have a more objective view of culture and some of the changes and things like that.
Yeah.
And what concerned me with the culture is how, and it sounds like, I'm an old person kind of looking down on what's going on today and the Gen Zers are bad and all that. That's not what I'm saying. But if you look at points and stakes in the ground of culture, how it's changed. And I think back to Columbine, for instance, if you remember in 99, school shooting, first one, it was like the earth stopped. It was so shattering. And now they're every day, and we don't even think that much about them. You think about drugs, used to, it was just taboo. And then, slowly starts creeping in with the legalization of marijuana. Now you have all these open air drug markets in these big cities and all this kind of stuff. You think about sex. Used to, before the internet and technology, it was pretty contained. It was obviously an issue, the things that go against God in the Bible. But now, with all the gender dysphoria and just the pornography and the rampant availability, Satan has done a masterful job. And I think believers have been behind the curve relative to what he's doing in introducing all these things. And there's something called ROC, rate of change. The rate of change has even increased, because you think back when our kids were in high school, we kind of know what that is, but you think in the last 5 years, things have gotten really a lot worse.
Oh, wow.
So that makes me really feel for parents of today. And then for me as a grandparent, because it's created so much confusion, so much just accepting of things that are wrong. And if I can throw out one verse that kind of it's become my life verse in a lot of ways, and it's kind of obscure verse, but it speaks to parents, and it speaks to us as if you're a believer into everything, I think, today, and it really helps boil things down. But 1 Corinthians 4 verses 3 and 4, Paul says, I care very little if I am judged by you or by any human court. Indeed, I do not even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges me. So several takeaways. One, I care very little if I'm judged by you or by any human court. With the way social media is and all of that, we are so concerned with what people think of us.
Mhm.
And so I think that's an admonition to not care what people think about us. He says, I care very little if I'm judged by you or by any human court. Then he
Mhm.
says something really interesting. Indeed, I do not even judge myself. My conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. And what I think that is a call to us as humans and as believers. Just because we think something's okay or we're all right with a particular stance, because of all the different voices we hear and all that, just because our conscience is clear, that does not make us innocent. So just because we believe something, if we haven't filtered it through what God says, then we may be wrong. So don't, just because I feel good about something doesn't mean it's good and
Wow.
I need to examine those. So my conscience is clear, but that does not make me innocent. It is the Lord who judges me. So
Mm.
how does he judge us? He judges us by scripture and by promptings of the Holy Spirit. So
Mhm.
I think that's a call to us as parents, and us in things we're doing in our own lives,
Mhm.
whether it's the media we're intaking or how we're acting on
Mhm.
social media or
Mhm.
whatever. It
Yeah.
all needs to boil back down to what does scripture say and what does the Holy Spirit say to me? And then that wipes away the confusion of what does this blog
Yeah.
post say so the book is a call to boil it back down to God.
Well, and just to be clear for everyone, this is based on biblical principles. So this is not based on psychology or and it's also practical. And may I say what I feel like is lacking in the world today, common sense. So much of this is not only biblical, it's just common sense
Mm-hmm.
in a world where common sense has flown out the window for a segment of society. Now, I think it's the loudest, most vocal. I think it is a minority, but I think that especially youngers who are parenting littles, they need this common sense. They need to be affirmed. These things that you're saying that are so important as a parent, knowing how to say no to your children when it's not easy,
Mm-hmm.
knowing how to know who their friends are and choose who their friends are when you are able to, because that gets harder as they get older. But there are just so many things here, Stephen. We're not going to be able to address all of these topics. I'm just hoping everyone will get the book, but to me, you have boiled down the elements that are most important in raising kids who are going to be salt and light and who are not going to be overtaken by this culture.
Mm-hmm.
Steve, and we could spend the whole hour on social media, but we thought it was bad when we were raising ours. Okay, it's horrible now. If you had to say what would be your best advice to parents, now it's harder based on their age. My advice, I know yours would be to start early and keep things at bay as long as you can. But what would you say to parents about social media and the best advice you can give them?
Yeah, I hate that. Let me back up. I think there's been some good that's come out of social media. I think the bad far outweighs the good. I think, and I sound like an alarmist, but like I said, having been alive as long as I have been, I can kind of see from an objective standpoint. I think social media in many ways is ruining society and particularly our kids. It is where a lot of hate is, a lot of discord, a lot of division, and a lot of the competing voices that are confusing our kids today. You look at, all the gender stuff. A lot of that is driven by social media, and because Satan is a master of confusion. So what my advice would be, and it's interesting because my daughter Madeline, who and Zach in Brooklyn is about to turn 5. Well, that's too young, but before they know it, she's going to be coming home saying, hey, this 8-year-old girl just got a phone. When can I get a phone?
Yep.
And I almost hesitate to say be a teetotaler, but the way it's going, I almost say just a ban on it until a certain age, like 16. Something drastic. I think, drastic times call for drastic measures. And there's nothing really good, I don't think, that's coming out of social media for our kids. You look at there's I think it's TTD, TikTok disorder, and they're treating tons of kids because of TikTok disorder. And I guess that's just their brains get so confused and messed up. And it's the thing about social media, Jamie, is all the platforms are built on one premise, and that's to give dopamine hits to the users. You know, if you get a like, if you get a share, all that, that's dopamine in the same way that a hit of meth, or if you're starving and you eat a chocolate chip cookie, or sex. I mean, the dopamine is a very powerful chemical in our brains, and that's what the social media platforms are built on. And so the more you become involved in that, the more the desire and the need for that dopamine hit takes over your brain. And pretty soon you're just, it's all you care about. So circling back to your question, if I had kids today, I would not let them be on social media until at the earliest 16. And I don't even know that I would give them a phone that had internet access until about the same time.
Well, let me just toss this little tidbit out. A dear friend of ours came and stayed with us a few days ago, and he has a Patriot mobile phone, and it's called something like, not minimal, but you can do everything but not access the internet. But it looks just like an iPhone. You can text, you can do all that maybe kids might feel the need to do. Hey, mom, pick me up at 5 after practice or whatever, but there's no internet. The internet access is where the problems sometimes creep in. So I do know, and I'm about to switch to Patriot Mobile when I can find the time to make, you got to have a little bit of time to make that happen. But there are alternatives. They don't have to just go without a phone, but it can be a pared down version.
Exactly. Because they need to be able to call or text you and say, practice is over, come pick me up. I'll tell you another thing on the social media and all of that I've really focused on. It's not just a problem because a girl's mean to another girl, or even because, there's instant access to pornography or whatever. There's so many problems with it. For instance, drugs, I mentioned a little while ago. Parents don't know it, but social media is an open air drug market. Your kids can go on there and in 5 minutes, literally get almost anything they want. And there's emojis that go along with it. It's a huge, it's a huge industry. And it's a way that kids, you go on Facebook and you find the people who have the emojis that say, I'm a dealer, and you can order a Xanax. That's bad in and of itself, but I know, are aware of all the deaths from opioids and all that kind of stuff. A big part of that, in terms of the overdoses, are teenage kids who are in, middle to upper middle or upper class families who ordered a Xanax on Facebook to be cool, and it had fentanyl, and they dropped over dead. I used to coach lacrosse, and this was 10 years ago, and 2 of my players both died from opioid addiction or overdose, and that was before fentanyl. And so parents need to be aware. Social media is not just a place to post pictures from the lake trip from the weekend. It's where drugs happen. And another thing I've been really convicted about, having gambled in my life previously, when I was young, is the gambling part. So now, instead of having to call a bookie and place a bet, and then if you lose, which most of the time you do, go meet somebody in an alley and hand them cash. Now it's all on the phone. And so you've got the apps, DraftKings and all that kind of stuff, and you have instant access. And my prediction, and I 100% believe this, in 5 years or less, maybe even now, we will have a gambling problem that is going to do what opioids has done in undermining our families, our culture, our country. So there's lots of bad things about social media. I mean, think about just the access to sex and pornography. Same thing. Back, not long ago, before social media, there was really no way you could get access to that kind of stuff. And now you can have access in 5 seconds if you have internet access to the grossest stuff you can imagine.
Yeah.
And so it's a big problem for me. I'd say 16 maybe a maturity level where they can, deal with some of the stuff. One other thing, and sorry to be on a soapbox.
I know. This is
In
important.
in writing the book, I really thought a lot about how much more important than ever it is for the parent-child relationship in terms of communication. Because before now, not so much, but somewhat, when our kids who are in their 20s and 30, you still could kind of say, no, don't do that, and that be it. Because the phones weren't there just wasn't as much bad stuff.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned push it out as far as you can. Kids can get around anything. They can hide anything from you that they want to. And that includes apps on their phone and whatever. So I think the relationship and openness we have with our kids at an earlier and earlier age does more than any parental controls or anything. Just talking to them about all these different dangers. And, like the sex conversation I mentioned, I think in my book, the birds and the bees, the world wants to talk to your kids about sex, but not the version they need to hear. We don't want to, because that's an uncomfortable conversation, but parents better step it up and be having those conversations earlier and earlier.
Right, right. And now the fact that in schools, teachers are not only allowed, but encouraged by certain states and the teachers' unions, the radical left, they're encouraging them to speak evil into these children, making them question their gender and offering. I mean, I believe it was yesterday, I saw on the front page of my Safari browser that Washington State, I believe, it just passed the legislature that schools they can circumvent parents and give children or refer them to get gender changing medications.
Yeah.
And that, I believe, is starting, well, if schools, so that's age 6 when they're in schools. The evil aspects of culture, they start early. So our idea of when to introduce certain things has got to shift. Yep. Because otherwise they will speak into kids if they're in scenarios where they're exposed to those people, if they're in schools. And, I would assume private schools would be pretty much immune to that. But I just think we have to strike while the iron is hot, because there's just it starts so early.
Yeah. And the education system is a whole nother subject for sure. And it is, Satan has used it just like the internet, and talk about creating confusion with our kids. And it used to be you worried about kids going to a liberal college. Now you better worry about K-3, because they're talking about things that there's no way kids can grasp. But if they get them early enough, the education system and Satan, then and we're asleep at the wheel as parents, then it's going to lead to a life of who knows what misery, confusion, and a lot of this stuff is leading to severe depression and suicide.
Yeah. Well, and I think what we're witnessing, and I hope I'm using this term correctly, is what we're seeing is the Overton window, where radical ideas that are just automatically repugnant to most people are just introduced early and often, where you're desensitized. Like now, normal people who never would have called someone by their chosen pronouns, or when someone says, "What are your pronouns?" would say, "What?" are now feeding into this craziness that's in our culture right now. And, feeling guilty if they don't use pronouns, that someone who's not this, but that, I mean, it's so crazy, Steve. I don't even want to get started, because this is your conversation here. But
can I add one thing there?
Yeah.
Totally agree with everything you said. And another thing I've noticed is a club that is used to beat us into submission if we disagree with that is you don't love. You're not loving if you're not accepting, but love and acceptance are two different things. We should love everybody. Everybody. And we know what love, love is patient, love is kind, it's not envies, not boasts, not proud, it's not rude, not self-seeking, not easily angered, keeps no record of wrong. So we should love everybody, but acceptance is actually a lot of times the opposite of love, particularly if it's directly incongruent with what the word says, because it's a spiritual issue and it's an eternity issue. And so don't let people say you're not loving because you don't accept this lifestyle. And a lot of believers are buying into that. I mean, if you look at what's happening in the Methodist Church right now. And so love and acceptance are not the same thing.
Absolutely. That is exactly right. Okay. So Steve, I want to move on to the simple life and one of my favorite chapters, a stick. Goodness, what was it?
Here's a stick and some dirt.
Here's a stick and some dirt. If that does not sum up the way I know that I was raised, and I think you and Leigh Ann and Zane, we went and found fun. We were not like, I know at my house, I was not constantly entertained. But this was an age where you could go play outside, play in the neighborhood, and come home when the street lights came on. Yep. And dirty, filthy, but you had a good, simple day. That was it. And you found fun and you had to be creative about it. Today, are you saying the same thing? Because I know you're studying culture more than I am. Parents feel like it is their responsibility to entertain their children or to keep them happy 24/7. And that's a path that will not end well. What are your thoughts on that?
That title, Here's a Stick and Some Dirt, came from me remembering I was 6. And I remember sitting out in my backyard and I had my Hot Wheels, and I can almost remember the exact stick and digging like trenches in the dirt and having a little dirt track with my Hot Wheels. And so when I started thinking, and that's the second chapter in the book, the first real topic that the Lord put on my heart, I think the simple life is very difficult to find today. I think for parents and for kids because of their parents. I think we as adults let our lives get way too busy too. And if we don't maintain margins, we can't enjoy the good things in life and we can't, enjoy relationships and things like that. But parents definitely think they have to keep their kids happy all the time. And that is a terrible thought to have, because eventually kids are going to be on their own. And what we do with them now or how we treat them now is going to have a lot to do with their happiness from age 20 to 80 or whatever. And so there's a verse like in Exodus 5, and I'm not even sure I put this in the book, but the Israelites are in captivity with Pharaoh and they want to go worship God. They want to do something on their own rather than build bricks. And so Pharaoh's response wasn't to beat them or to, have some sort of other negative reaction. He said, take their straw away, but make their quota of bricks be the same. And if you can think about building an adobe brick, straw holds it all together. So it'd be much more difficult. And so taking the straw away, what that meant was make their lives busier so they don't have time for the better things. And so we have to ask ourselves, is there straw in our bricks? Because a lot of us live lives of building bricks with no straw and we have time for nothing else. So the simple life, getting rid of some stuff, even if it's not being on 2 sports teams with just 1 sports team, or not having dance and piano and soccer for a girl, maybe just have soccer. And so maintaining margins is so important, because kids otherwise will grow up, once again, leads to that confusion and not really developing their minds.
Well, this naturally leads me to, the entertaining and the complicated schedule versus a simple schedule, especially early on in their formative years, sort of segues into materialism. And I think this really, you start seeing this even in good parents. You start seeing, or at least I saw this in about the preteen years, you start seeing parents showering their children with things that take away any ability to hope for something better or to save or work for something better. Like when they turned 16, how many parents did you see who bought their 16-year-old children brand new cars and handed them the keys? That, and I'm going to say it, in my opinion, I just think that's insane.
Yeah. I talk about that in the book because that's exactly what happened with Madeline when she turned 16. And, I'm not being disparaging to parents, and everybody has their own, own way of doing things, but I could not believe up at Spain Park High School, the number of $80,000 BMWs brand new. And I sat there one day and thought about that. And I thought, this is almost an arms race for the parents, not for the kids.
Yeah.
And Leigh Ann told me a lady in a small group one time, and it was a Highland small group, I'm not sure that you were in it, stood up and said, mothers, if you have a daughter, quit setting our sons up for failure. And what she meant was, y'all are giving your daughters everything they could possibly want, the best of, and then when they marry our sons, they're going to be disappointed because he can't provide them what you're providing them.
And mommy.
Yeah. So have to be so careful with that. But once again, we want our kids to have the best life they possibly can, and having the best life they possibly can is really much more detrimental to them in the long term.
Well, and Steve, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said the reasoning behind a lot of that extravagant and just premature giving kids who didn't earn that. Well, they don't earn it. They're handed something brand new. And a lot of that is because the parents have a hole they're trying to fill, or the parents have a status they're trying to maintain. And I will tell you, it can be a little difficult when your good parenting friends who are good people, who they might make the choice to give their kids a brand new $80,000, $100,000 vehicle when they turn 16. And you choose, like we did, to tell our girls, we will pay half of your car, knowing that it would not be, they're not going to have $40,000.
Yeah.
We'll pay half. We'll help you find one that's good and reliable. And I don't think either of our girls ever had more than probably a $7,000 or $8,000 car when they were 16. Not that we're the gold standard, but that car is going to look a lot different from their friend's car. And you have to be, as a parent, able to be okay with that. And if your child will, John Doe, he's got a brand new, honey, I love you, but this is just not the way we're going to do it. I mean, you have to be able to not only not worry what your friends think, but you're going to have to know that your child, depending on their personality, is going to maybe give you some grief, maybe try to make you feel guilty if you don't fall into lockstep.
Yeah. I care very little if I'm judged by you or by any human court.
That's a good, that verse is very applicable to a lot of what we're talking about.
Yeah. But it is important too, in this whole communication thing, Jamie, with kids now. I think kids are really savvy. They have access to so much information, and it's really important for us as parents to tell them why. Not just to say, when we were kids, I did stuff because I was afraid my dad was going to wear me out if I didn't. There was no why, just do it. When you and I became, parents to our people, I think we did a better job of that, but there was still that element of just do it. Now more than ever, because of I don't know if it's sophistication, but it's definitely worldly knowledge. I think we have to say, here's why I'm doing this, and this is why it will benefit you. And then stand up. Don't let them talk you into something that you don't really believe is the thing to do.
Yeah. That's very good, Steve. Okay. This again leads to, we've gone from just briefly discuss materialism. This leads me to something that you addressed and that we tried with our girls. And I think that if you do this, you will see children who are salt and light. And if you started early, servanthood.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw how y'all, I saw all the ways Leigh Ann served at school, but then also the less fortunate. There were myriad times that I saw her and y'all serving the less fortunate. And sometimes if your church, now we were affiliated with churches that had myriad opportunities. You didn't have to work hard to find a way to serve multiple socioeconomic statuses through the way Serve Day and all the different programs. But we had a prayer for our girls, and we would pray it out loud in carpool line. And then I want you to speak to this. We said, Lord, bless them from the crown of their head to the sole of their feet. Help them to love everyone, especially the disadvantaged and the unfortunate.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've always pointed out, be as nice or nicer to the McDonald's waiter or waitress than you are to Pastor Chris or to to those who, garner respect.
Right.
What are your thoughts on how some practical ways that you can instill in them a love for the less fortunate and a heart of a servant that will perpetuate as they grow and into adulthood?
Mm-hmm. That's harder than ever because the sense of entitlement that society creates is so strong. It's all about, what are my rights? I'm entitled to this. Whatever you do or think, you're wrong. And so it's a me beyond belief. And so that makes it more difficult to really instill a servant heart in our kids, even though that's the most fulfilling. If you talk to anybody that does something nice for somebody, they'll say, that's the best I felt in a long time. Mm-hmm. Because God created that in us, that need, but it gets pushed out because we're all about us. And I'm raising my hand. I'm a victim of that.
Steve, may I interrupt and say one
Yeah.
thing you just said earlier?
Yeah.
Okay. You were talking about the things that give us a dopamine hit.
Mm-hmm.
But you just said God created us basically to get a dopamine hit when we do something for others. But we don't realize that until we go out and serve. It's the biggest shot of dopamine ever. When you go help someone that can't do something for themselves and they're crying and grateful, or maybe they're not grateful, it's a dopamine hit. And you pointed that out earlier.
It is. It so much is. And so what do we do with our kids? Well, in a lot of what I say in my book, and I call parents out on a lot of things because parents have to more than ever lead by example.
Yeah.
Rather than just telling your kid, you're going to youth group or whatever. Mm-hmm. Kids are watching us. They're not into false and fake and, facades. And so we have to lead by example. So how do we do that? It doesn't have to be I'm serving 16 hours every weekend at a soup kitchen. It can be little things. Here's a story, and I'll brag on Leigh Ann. I know, I think she's the greatest person on earth. But there's a part in the book I say, a story I tell. When we were adults, we had kids, and there was a yard in our neighborhood it was kind of, they were letting it go. It looked terrible. And we lived in a pretty nice neighborhood. And so one day I came home and I said, and this is so funny how God has a sense of humor. I said, I think I'm going to put a note in those people's mailbox telling them anonymously to clean their yard up. And she literally was rolling the lawnmower out of the garage when I drove up in my truck. And she said, I'm about to put this lawnmower in your truck and go up and cut those people's grass because I'm sure something's wrong, and they probably had a death in the family or, an illness or whatever. And I mean, once again, me compared to her, I am way back in her shadows. And I was like, what a great instance of her being able to show her servant heart, which comes very naturally, but it doesn't have to come naturally. Sometimes it's a learned behavior. She was going to cut their grass when I was going to go put a note in their mailbox. And so little things like that have huge impacts on our kids relative to living a life of servanthood, which goes back to the salt. Jesus said we're the salt and light. Servanthood is part of that. So we have to get away from teaching our kids to have a sense of entitlement and teaching them and get to teaching them how to serve other people, because that's what Jesus did. Jesus never had a sense of entitlement. He never asked people, what can you do for me? He only asked and looked for ways he could do things for other people.
I love that, Steve. And it's so practical, but so good. And then I just want to hit a few more things, because I know I've had you for almost an hour and you've got tons of other things you've got going on, but just some of the things that, like, to me, this is just so practical, but I saw it in myself and in other parents. Does your child forget things a lot? Maybe it's because you do too much remembering for them. If you let your daughter forget something she's supposed to bring to school and she gets in trouble, she's more likely to remember it the next time.
Yeah.
How many times do we get the text from our child, I forgot my math book, and you're going to, oh, trust me, you will get at least 10 to 20 in their lifetime of school, unless you start early. It only takes a few getting in trouble, failing the test to nip that in the bud.
Yeah.
But it requires discipline on our part, because we tend to feel guilty. Well, I'm here, I can do that. It's not that hard. But we have to think beyond that to what is this forming in our child. Yeah.
I printed out a couple of quotes from the book just because I don't know them by memory. But here's one where I deal with that. And I kind of like this quote. If our kids rarely or never experience bad situations because we as parents act like bumpers in a bowling lane for them, their growth as humans will be stunted. They need to throw a gutter ball every now and then. Without bumpers, their bowling score won't always be as good, but eventually they will become better overall bowlers. So you think about bowling with bumpers. Doesn't really matter how you throw the ball, because you know it's going to hit the pins because you've got guardrails. And so, my score will be better. And if you look at the guardrails being the parents always making sure everything's right and everything's getting done for the kids. Well, I'll have a better score, but I'll still be a bad bowler. And once I get the bumpers taken away, I become an adult, I'm going to be throwing gutter balls all over the place. Whereas if my parents had made me bowl without bumpers to some level, of course, we can't let our kids get to disaster, get hurt or anything like that. But if we take the bumpers away at opportune times, they'll become better bowlers. So parents have to let their kids fail. It's just the way it is. I hate it for you, but it's your fault and you can do better next time. And that's where they learn. And I just want to hit a few of these other topics where people will get an idea of what is in the book. Chapter 6. And we have heard Pastor Chris, how many times have we heard him say, show me your friends, I'll show you your future. That is 100% rock solid true all the time. This chapter, if you don't know their friends, you don't know their children, 100%. And, we could talk again an hour on that. But would you agree with Zane and me that very early on, we chose our friends based on whose friends we wanted our children to have? And we did that because let me tell you, even when you choose the best of the best of the best, you'll be surprised at some of the decisions parents make, even good parents make, decisions that we made that were not right. So if you're having to deal with, that kind of thing with the best parents, you better be diligent not to go with mediocre or, parents who don't have close to your values. Yes, 100%. You think about the influence you have on your kids, starting about 10 or 11 or 12, their friends are all of a sudden become way more influential than you are in their life. So you've got to be diligent in knowing who their friends are. And I think about my life, the ups and downs, 100% mirrored the kind of people I hung out with. And so we have to be really diligent and know their friends, get to know them personally, know their parents, all that. And one other thing I'll say about friends, the thing that scares me today, a lot of kids don't have real friends. All their relationships are on social media. and and on the internet and different places. And so it's easy for them to think they're getting fulfilled in their friendship needs when they're in a gaming room, chatting 10 hours a day. You got to force them out. You got to force them into friend relationships with real human beings.
Oh, amen. That's so true. And again, because we're out of time, but you on chapter 7, boyfriends and girlfriends.
Yeah.
Woo, big one. Chapter 8, the curse of modern technology, and then narcissism and the crowded trophy case. Very solid chapter there. Loved that. Zane and I had some conversations on that. The oil of the earthly life engine, money, hierarchy of relationships, leaving it all on the field. Steve, I just commend you. This book is wonderful. It's anointed. And I'm very, very grateful that you allowed me to be able to share it with anyone who might follow me and take my recommendations to heart, which all of you listening or watching, please buy this, if not for yourselves, to give it to someone who's parenting.
And it's not to, and this isn't about pushing it. It's on Amazon and all the other places available.
We're going to put links. Yeah.
Okay, good. Paperback, audiobook, and ebook.
Oh, did you read your audiobook?
I didn't.
That's so funny. That because Zane did a book and he didn't do his, and I'm like, why? But that's a whole ordeal to do that. It's not easy to do.
I didn't do it because of the production requirements that I had no idea about.
Yeah, that's why he didn't on his. But okay, I will put links, everyone, to all the places you can buy the book or the audiobook, the way that you can access the Salt and Light Kids social media. Steve, what is on the what do you put on the Salt and Light Kids Instagram and Facebook? Just
it's Salt, Light, and Kids. And I'm not a great social media person. I use it very little, but I am starting, particularly on Instagram. I just started a Facebook page, but on Instagram, I'll post some stuff. I'm really going to do better about posting regularly on both Instagram and Facebook. So it's both at Salt, Light, and Kids. And so I'm going to do better.
Oh, well, listen, you've done great. I would not recommend this if I didn't wholeheartedly think it was everything in here will help you be a better parent. So everyone buy the book. Steve, thank you. And
thank you.
Hug that beautiful wife of yours. Give her a big kiss for me, and let's get together soon.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Steve. You're welcome back on anytime you want.
We'll get her on next time.
Absolutely. Okay, Steve, thank you.